The Fence Between Us. Welcome back to the Worthington Chronicles. If you enjoy stories of healing hearts and unexpected love, please like this video and subscribe for more full-length romances. Now, settle in for our next tale. The first light of dawn was still a faint promise in the sky when Clayton Hayes stepped onto his porch, the worn wood creaking under his boots. The air was cool and carried the familiar sense of damp earth, hay, and animals. It was a smell that usually grounded him, but this morning it just felt heavy. Another day was beginning, and he was already tired. Inside the farmhouse, the day's chaos had already erupted. The clatter of cereal bowls and the high-pitched, overlapping voices of his 7-year-old twin daughters, Lily and Lucy, echoed through the rooms. "Daddy." "Lucy can't find her other boot," Lily announced, skidding into the kitchen, her hair a wild mane of curls. "I can too," Lucy argued, trailing behind her, holding a single mud-caked boot. Clayton ran a hand over his face, the stubble rough against his palm. "Check under the sofa, Luce. And Lily, stop feeding your toast to the dog." He moved. Through the morning routine on autopilot, a 7-year grind of single parenthood that had worn him down to his core. He loved his girls with a ferocity that sometimes frightened him, but the relentless tide of their energy, combined with the endless demands of the farm, was a weight he carried alone. After ushering them onto the school bus, he turned to the real work. There were fences to mend, hay to bale, and a temperamental tractor that refused to start. He lost himself in the physical labor, the sun climbing high and hot overhead. For a few hours, the only sounds were the grunt of the tractor engine finally turning over and the distant bleating of his sheep. It was during a moment of hard-won quiet that a cold dread settled in his stomach. The farm was too quiet. He straightened up, his back protesting, and scanned the yard. "Lily, Lucy," he called out. Silence. His heart kicked against his ribs. "Girls, this isn't funny." He jogged toward the house, then the barn, his calls growing more frantic. Panic, a familiar and unwelcome guest, began to claw at his throat. Then he saw a few broken strands of the old wire fence that separated his land from the new neighbor's place. A place he had deliberately avoided. Without a second thought, he vaulted over the damaged section and ran, his boots pounding against the earth. Please let them be okay. Please let them be safe. The mantra beat in time with his heart. He pushed through a line of trees and stopped dead. There, in the middle of a sun-drenched, impossibly vibrant garden, were his daughters. They were not lost or hurt. They were kneeling in the dirt, perfectly still, their attention completely captured by the woman crouched before them. She was showing them something in the palm of her hand, her voice a soft, melodic murmur that Clayton couldn't quite make out. Lily, his bold adventurer, was pointing at a flower with intense focus. Lucy, his quiet shadow, had a small, delicate butterfly perched on her finger, her face a picture of rapturous wonder. The woman looked up then, and her eyes met Clayton's. They were the color of warm honey, and they held a quiet depth that seemed to see right through his panic. She didn't look angry or annoyed at the two muddy children who had trespassed into her sanctuary. She looked curious and perhaps a little bit sad. So sorry," Clayton managed, his voice rough with adrenaline and guilt. "They got through the fence. I didn't know they were over here." The woman stood, brushing soil from her knees. Her smile was gentle. "No harm done. We were just getting acquainted. I'm Savannah Taylor." "Clayton Hayes," he said, nodding stiffly. He looked at his daughters, who were now looking at him with wide, slightly guilty eyes. "Girls, we need to go. You can't just run off like that." "But Dad," Lily protested, her voice full of passion. "Savannah has a caterpillar that makes a cocoon out of leaves." "Leaves?" "And she has honeysuckle," Lucy added, her voice barely a whisper, as if sharing a sacred secret. Clayton felt a familiar pang, a mixture of love and a crushing sense of failure. They were so hungry for this, for beauty, for gentle attention, for a softness he struggled to provide. Savannah's gaze softened, as if she could read his thoughts. "They're always welcome, Clayton." "Really?" He just nodded again, her kindness somehow making him feel more exposed. "Come on, girls. Let's go home. He herded them back toward the broken fence, the image of Savannah Taylor standing in her sunlit garden, surrounded by color and life, already seared into his mind. His world, all hard edges and weary survival, had just been cracked open, and he had no idea what to do about it. If you are enjoying this story of a weary father and a healing heart, please support our channel by liking this video and subscribing to the Worthington Chronicles. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. The soft morning rain pattered against the farmhouse windows, a sound that usually soothed Clayton. Today, it felt like a trap. He'd mended the broken fence, but he knew his daughters. For Lily and Lucy, a fence was an invitation, not a barrier. The first sign of trouble came when Lily lifted her head like a little bloodhound. "I smell something," she announced. Lucy, quieter but just as perceptive, nodded in agreement, her nose twitching. A sweet, warm scent was drifting on the damp breeze, cutting straight through the familiar smells of wet earth and animals. It was the unmistakable aroma of baking. Across the property line, Savannah Taylor had been listening to the rain and understood the restless energy building next door. She'd seen the hungry curiosity in the girls' eyes, recognized their need for more than just functional care. So she baked. She made a batch of enormous blueberry muffins, the kind with a sugary, crumbly top that peaked like a mountain. She arranged them on a beautiful ceramic plate, setting out a dish of soft butter and a jar of wild blackberry jam alongside them. A pitcher of fresh orange juice and a pot of tea steamed gently on the table. Then, she left her back door unlocked and went to work in her garden, a silent, hopeful invitation. The sweet scent was a siren's call. Clayton was mucking out stalls when the sudden, profound silence alerted him. He followed the trail of small, muddy footprints leading through the damp earth toward Savannah's property, the sugary smell growing stronger with every step. He found them in her kitchen, a picture of pure bliss. They were seated at her table, their little legs swinging happily. Each held a massive muffin in two hands. Lily was slathering hers with a generous amount of butter and jam, while Lucy was carefully dipping pieces of hers into a small glass of orange juice, a look of experimental delight on her face. Savannah was sipping her tea, a soft smile on her lips as she watched them. "We were just conducting some very important taste tests," she explained to Clayton, her eyes warm. Standing in the doorway, rain-dampened and feeling like an intruder, Clayton began his usual gruff apology. "I told them not to come over here. And I told them they were always welcome," Savannah said calmly. She gestured to the feast. "There's plenty. The tea is still hot." For a moment, Clayton just watched his daughters. Their joy was so complete, so unburdened. This was more than a snack. It was a celebration. The sight of them enjoying something so simple and wonderful, something so far beyond his usual rushed breakfast of beans and toast, filled him with a strange, aching happiness. They were being cared for in a way he hadn't realized they were. "Missing. We need to go," he finally said, his voice softer than before, the sharp edge of frustration gone. "Thank you for all of this." He herded the happily sticky girls back toward their own home, the image of that abundant table and their radiant faces lingering in his mind. It was more than just muffins and jam. It was a glimpse of a life that could be fuller, sweeter, and he carried that hope with him all the way back to the quiet, empty farmhouse. The next morning, Clayton woke before dawn with a new determination. The memory of his daughter's joyful, jam-smeared faces at Savannah's table had haunted him all night. He couldn't offer them a perfect kitchen or homemade muffins, but he could fix what was broken. After seeing the girls onto the school bus, he gathered his tools and headed not to his own endless list of chores, but to the property line. He worked through the morning, replacing the old, sagging wire fence with sturdy new posts and crisp, clean boards. It was more than a repair. It was an apology, a promise of better boundaries. As he was hammering the last board into place, he heard the gentle crunch of footsteps on the gravel path behind him. Savannah stood there, holding 2 glasses of iced tea, condensation already beating on the sides. "You've been busy," she said, her voice carrying that same calm warmth he was starting to recognize. Clayton wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. "The old one wasn't doing its job." She handed him one of the glasses. The girls are lovely, Clayton. Truly. He took a long drink, the cool tea a blessing in the growing heat. They're a handful. I know they've been bothering you. They're not a bother, she said firmly. They're curious and full of life. She looked at the new fence, then back at him. This is very permanent. Is that a problem? He asked, suddenly uncertain. No, she said softly. It's nice, knowing where the boundaries are. She gave him a small, understanding smile before turning back toward her garden. The back door will still be unlocked, Clayton, just in case. He stood there long after she'd gone, finishing his tea and staring at the solid, honest fence he'd built between them. For the first time in years, he felt like he'd done something right. The boundaries were clear, but for the first time, the space between them didn't feel so vast. A few days later, a crisis struck the Hayes farm. One of Clayton's pregnant ewes went into a difficult labor. For hours, he worked in the barn, his hands slick with sweat and worry. But the lamb was badly positioned. He was losing both of them. In his desperation, a thought surfaced. Savannah. She'd mentioned once during one of the girls' visits that she'd grown up on a farm and had assisted with many animal births. Swallowing his pride, he ran to the house and called her. Within minutes, Savannah was in the barn, rolling up her sleeves. She didn't flinch at the sight or the stress. Her hands were calm and sure as she worked alongside him, her voice a steady murmur to the distressed ewe. Together, they managed to gently reposition the lamb. When the tiny, wet creature slid safely into the straw, followed by a weary but healthy mother, a profound relief washed over Clayton. He sat back in the hay, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and looked at Savannah. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair escaping its braid, but she was smiling. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling inadequate for the gratitude swelling in his chest. I couldn't have done that alone. Savannah just wiped her hands on a clean rag. "You don't always have to," she replied softly. That evening, after the girls were in bed, he stood on his porch and looked across the field to the warm light glowing in Savannah's kitchen window. The fence was there, solid and true, but it no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a beginning. The space between their two homes didn't seem so vast anymore, and for the first time in a very long while, Clayton didn't feel entirely alone. The hike. Days began to take on a new rhythm. The sturdy white fence stood as a quiet promise of order, but the path between the two farms saw more traffic than ever. It was no longer just the girls who crossed it. A few afternoons later, Clayton found himself standing on Savannah's porch, a bag of fresh vegetables from his garden in hand. It was a poor excuse for a thank you, but it was all he had. Savannah answered the door, her face softening when she saw him. "Clayton, come in." He stepped inside, the warmth and the faint scent of herbs and something baking washing over him. "Brought you some of the first tomatoes," he said, holding out the bag. "It's not much for what you did." "It's perfect," she said, accepting the gift. "I was just about to have some coffee. Would you like a cup?" He nodded, and they sat at her kitchen table, the same table where his daughters had experienced such simple joy. For the first time, he wasn't here in a panic or out of duty. He was here because he wanted to be. They talked. Not about the farm or the children, but about themselves. He learned she had been a teacher before her divorce, that she missed the classroom sometimes. She learned that he'd wanted to be a mechanic before inheriting the family farm, that he still loved the quiet satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. When he finally stood to leave, the afternoon light was fading. "The girls would love to see you for supper sometime," he found himself saying, the words surprising them both. "It wouldn't be anything fancy, just supper." Savannah's smile reached her eyes, making them sparkle. "I'd like that, Clayton. I really would." Walking home, the evening air cool on his skin, Clayton didn't feel the usual weight of the coming night. Instead, he felt a lightness, a sense of possibility he hadn't known in years. The fence marked the boundary, but it no longer defined the space between them. Something new was growing there, and for the first time, he was eager to see what it might become. Of course, here is the rewritten chapter where Savannah retreats. The blueberry bush was in the ground, its leaves a vibrant green promise against the dark soil. Clayton's hand still held Savannah's, their linked fingers resting on the warm earth between them. The silence was charged, full of everything they hadn't yet said. "Savannah," Clayton began again, his voice low and rough with emotion. He used his free hand to gently turn her face toward his. "I've been living in a world of gray for so long. You brought the color back." Tears welled in Savannah's eyes, but they were tears of joy. She saw the truth in his gaze. "You brought the life back to me, Clayton," she whispered. "After my husband, after all the lies and the other women, I never thought I could trust a man again. But I trust you." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. "Well, isn't this a touching scene?" The sharp nasal voice sliced through the moment like a shard of glass. They sprang apart to see Penelope Higgins standing at the edge of the garden, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Penelope," Clayton said, his voice tight, "this is a private conversation." "Is it?" She sniffed, her eyes raking over Savannah with disdain. "I just thought you should know, Clayton, that the whole town is talking. They're saying you're being taken for a fool, that this one," she gestured rudely at Savannah, "is just looking for a man to support her now that her own husband threw her out. A man with a farm is a mighty tempting target for a woman with nothing." The words hit their mark with brutal precision. Savannah recoiled, all the color draining from her face. The old wound of her husband's betrayal, the very foundation of her insecurity, was torn wide open. The fragile trust she had built with Clayton shattered under the weight of public judgment and cruel insinuation. "Penelope, get off my land. Now," Clayton commanded, his voice like thunder. With a final triumphant smirk, Penelope turned and left. Clayton turned back to Savannah, his expression full of fierce protectiveness. "Savannah, don't listen to a word of that. She's just a bitter, jealous." But Savannah was already backing away, her hands held up as if to ward him off. The warm, open woman from moments before was gone, replaced by someone guarded and terrified. "She's right, Clayton. This was a mistake. I can't do this." "Savannah, wait." But she didn't wait. She turned and fled into her house, closing the door firmly behind her. Clayton was left alone in the garden, the freshly planted blueberry bush a cruel symbol of a future that had been offered and then snatched away. The space between the farms, which had felt so small moments ago, now seemed like an impossible distance. For days, her house remained quiet, her curtains drawn, and the path between their homes stayed empty. The silence from Savannah's farm was a physical weight on Clayton's chest. For 3 days, her curtains remained drawn, her door closed. These Hakubai twins asked about her constantly, their small faces etched with a confusion that mirrored his own heart. He tried to focus on the chores, but his mind was across the field, trapped in that quiet house. Finally, he could stand it no longer. He marched to her door, his knocks echoing in the stillness. "Savannah, please, we need to talk." There was no answer. He tried again the next day and the next. Each time, met with silence. The 4th day, he found a simple note tucked into his screen door. "Clayton, I need time. Please don't come by." The note felt like a door slamming shut. He respected her wish, but the emptiness that settled over his own farm was worse than any he had known before. He had tasted hope, and its absence was a new kind of torment. A week later, a different car pulled into his drive. A social worker stepped out, holding a file. "Mr. Hayes, we've received an anonymous report concerning the welfare of your children. We need to ask you some questions." As Clayton answered the woman's polite but probing questions, his blood ran cold. He knew, with a sickening certainty, who had made the call. Penelope Higgins had not been content to just poison his chance at happiness. She was now threatening the one thing he held most dear, his daughters. The fight for his future was no longer just about mending a broken heart. It was about protecting his family. Clayton didn't go to the authorities. He went to the source. With Savannah by his side, her presence a quiet pillar of strength, he walked up to Penelope Higgins's front porch. The older woman opened the door with a smug, condescending smile that quickly faltered when she saw their united front. "We know you called child services, Penelope," Clayton stated, his voice low and dangerous. "We're not here to argue. We're here to give you a choice." Savannah spoke next, her voice calm but unyielding. "You will write a signed, notarized letter to the caseworker, retracting your statement and admitting you made a false report out of personal spite. You will also apologize to Clayton and his daughters." "Or what?" Penelope sneered, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Or," Clayton said, taking a step forward, "I will file a lawsuit for defamation and malicious prosecution. I will also share the security footage from my barn camera that clearly shows you trespassing on my property last week, which I'm sure the sheriff would find interesting. Your reputation in this town will be dust." The color drained from Penelope's face. She had underestimated Clayton, thinking him a simple, grieving farmer. She had not counted on his resolve, or the quiet woman beside him who gave him strength. Defeated, she agreed to their terms. Within a week, the formal retraction was delivered. The threat to Clayton's family was extinguished, and Penelope Higgins became a reclusive figure on the outskirts of town, her poisonous influence finally neutralized. 1 year later, the Hayes farm was alive with laughter and the scent of blooming flowers from Savannah's expanded garden. A sturdy, white-painted gate now stood in the fence, and it was almost always open. Clayton stood at the stove, flipping pancakes under the delighted supervision of Lily and Lucy. It was a Saturday morning ritual, one he cherished. "Don't forget." "The blueberries, Dad," Lucy reminded him. "I would never," he said, sprinkling a generous handful into the batter. The blueberries came from the bush he and Savannah had planted together, now thriving. Savannah entered the kitchen, her hair still damp from the morning dew in her garden. She slipped her arms around Clayton's waist, resting her head against his back. "Smells good in here." He turned and kissed her, a simple domestic gesture that still filled him with wonder. The girls giggled, used to the sight but still delighted by it. They were a family, not born from blood, but built from broken pieces mended by trust, patience, and a love that had weathered a storm. The past was a quiet memory, and the future was a bright, open field waiting for them to explore it together, one happy, sun-drenched day at a time. We hope you enjoyed this story of healing and new beginnings. If it brought a little warmth to your day, please like this video and subscribe to the Worthington Chronicles for more full-length romance stories. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you for being part of our story.